Um, Hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing very well. Thank you very much for this opportunity to participate in the 2024 International Multidisciplinary Conference. Um, so I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Qazi Zulqurnain, although it's a pretty long name that you can see on the screen, but Qazi is just fine. And I'm the founding director of the Youth Center for Research. That's the organization that I'm representing. Um, A brief about my academic background. So I am currently pursuing my doctoral study in education policy at The Ohio State University, the US, as a Fulbright scholar. And previously, I also had Achieving Scholarship, through which I was able to pursue my master's from the UK back in 2017. Professional affiliation, I've majorly worked in the education sector in different capacities. I've been part of academia as an academic. My last affiliation was that of a lecturer, and I'm currently an affiliated lecturer at Habib University. And other than that, I've worked on different projects in collaboration with international development agencies, local provincial governments. Yeah. So my research focus in my current doctoral study is basically related to international student mobility, something which is extremely important in current time period, which is regarded as the era of mobility or migration. So I'm primarily focusing on international students, international graduate students who are pursuing STEM programs in the US and focusing primarily on their post-study transitional experiences. The focus of my discussion today, as it pertains to the theme of curriculum design and quality assurance. So I shall be focusing, it's a very focused discussion to cover as to what curriculum design, what is the nature and expectation of curriculum design, and a brief about the trajectory and the historical transitions that this focus has had over time. And then, of course, what quality assurance is and what are the requisites that the quality assurance demands. And then, of course, what is the purpose behind all of this discussion? That is, what is the purpose of revisiting or visiting or discussing? We're talking about curriculum design and also quality assurance. So, what are we trying to achieve, or what things should we keep in mind when we are talking about these things? So curriculum design, the nature and expectation. So when we talk about curriculum, we are actually talking about something to do with civilization. It is also to do with knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, knowledge relevance. That is a primary question of what is worth knowing or what is worth spending time on to advance human progress. And so therefore, curriculum is in temporal sense, it pertains to both the present um, and the future. And while it also considers the past in terms of learning. So it's an evolutionary process. In the 20th century, there was an experimentalist movement, as we know, progressive movement for that matter. And so therefore it was basically being argued that education and or educational progress um, should rather be, the problem solving for educational progress, the curriculum must be in congruence with the nature and the needs of the learner for effective living in democratic societies. That is the focus during that time period, that is the early 20th century, was that education should not only focus on building, the focus should not only be like reductive skill centricity, but rather should enable the person to be able to contribute in a democratic society. So it kind of was also hinting at the democratic values. Over time, now if we see in more contemporary discussions, for example, there has been a recent emphasis or a growing emphasis on designing a curriculum which has global orientation, which basically fosters understanding of world societies. And then we can see, things like peace education, intercultural studies, and of course, global developmental studies. So these aspects basically talk about um, curriculum with a global perspective or a global site. And so therefore, But in talking about the 21st century, now the development um, the curriculum development now aims to prepare students for the challenges of the 21st century. And so therefore, it also aims to promote or has an added emphasis on critical thinking, collaborations, and self-regulation, which basically means preparing one to become a lifelong independent learner. But over the period of time, all of these developments and all of these changes have actually shifted a lot of focus from content to competency. That is the curriculum. That is, for example, instead of focusing on, okay, we need to make sure that students know this and this and that, or students, or we should be able to cover this content or that content in a given amount of time. Rather, it's more competency focused, which basically is outcome orientation as to what are we supposed to expect out of this educational process. So content is there, but what is that content going to result in? What is the outcome or learning outcome of that particular content? So this shift is pretty evident, and it is tied with the expectations of 21st century. And we can see some of the prevalent challenges of our time, climate change being one of the prominent ones, and of course the downfall of democracy as well. But what about Zambia? How has Zambia been responding to all of these curriculum development expectations? So in 2013, the Ministry of General Education in Zambia, they adopted a competency-based or outcome-based education approach, which approach to learning, and this basically meant that the curriculum. I mean, this basically meant that there was a shift from a content-based curriculum to more of a competency or outcome-based curriculum. This approach was finalized in 2017, and that's when the implementation basically also started. And this shift also meant that there was more of a focus on experiential learning. That is, learners would acquire knowledge and skills, values, attitudes values and attitudes. They will be able to criticize, they will be able to analyze, they will be able to practically apply their learnings to reality. So while we talk about competent, I mean, I'll briefly explain as to what competency basically really is. So one thing which is very very important to consider, that although we have had a shift from content focus to competency focus in our curriculum development, one thing which is extremely important to keep in mind is that there is a distinction between the word competence and the word competency. For example, we say that, oh, this person has this competence. So normally the word competence is pretty short-sighted in the sense that it's very specific to a certain task. It's very specific to a certain profession. It's very specific to a certain skill that is required in a certain situation to do a certain thing. Whereas competency is more to do with the person. It's a person-related concept. Whereas competence is a work-related concept. So competency is not just skills. Competency is also about values, your attitudes, your ability to understand the situation, self-awareness, and all of those things. Being able to reflect, having that reflexivity. So the values and so competency is more holistic in its approach, rather than just simply focusing on what a person can actually do in terms of completing a certain task. So let's talk about a certain this framework. I came across this. I should have given my source here. But anyway, so this framework basically talks about the 21st century skill set that are expected from individuals. The reason why this slide is immediately after the competency and the competence differences that I was trying to talk about, is because we also, discussed and I briefly highlighted in one of the previous slides that there has been a shift in the focus in terms of curriculum development, and While that shift and while that global trajectory has been progressing, there is now an emphasis that the curriculum should be designed in a way that it should prepare people for the 21st century expectations or challenges. So, what are the 21st century skill sets that are needed in view of those challenges that we are considering? So, some of the things you must have heard that we put a lot of emphasis in terms of critical thinking and problem solving, then creativity, and then innovation, then being able to communicate and being able to collaborate. And then, of course, technology is another important facet as our education is becoming, and of course, generally any field for that matter, is becoming more technologically advanced and technologically enriching. So information, so having information, having information and communication technology literacy, information literacy, and media literacy is also very important. Now, information literacy means being able to know how, where, and what sort of information to acquire, and also how to evaluate its validity. And then in terms of life and career skills, being flexible, adaptable, initiative, being able to take initiative and self-direction, social and cross-cultural skills, productivity and accountability skills, leadership and responsibility skills. While these are all skills, the framework is still skill-centric. And here I would like to emphasize that if we were to look at this table from a competency perspective, I would say that it should have also talked about the idea of values. What sort of values are we considering? What should be the framework that an individual might have in order to view, understand, and critically analyze the problems or the issues that society might be facing? What is at the same time the philosophical standing of the individual, and what ought to be the philosophical standing of the society for that matter? So I feel like those values should have also been talked about in this framework, and especially when we're talking about the 21st century challenges. I think a lot of that is to do with the values we hold. Which is more of a philosophical dimension. Now, when we talk about curriculum development, and then later when we'll talk about quality assurance, some of the things, the idea of time and relevance become all the more important. So talking about content-based curriculum and competency-based curriculum or outcome-based curriculum, the relevance of time, the notion of time and relevance are important because now the progression or the educational progression is based on outcomes rather than a passage of time. If we look at the Zambian education system or any education system in any developing country for that matter, they're still basically time-based in the sense that, okay, fine, class 1, class 2, class 3, you spend almost 1 year in one classroom, then you'll spend this much here in this classroom. So although the temporal focus is not like it can be completely sidelined, but the thing is that how much of emphasis are we placing on time and how much of emphasis are we placing on the outcome are extremely important. Because when we talk about outcomes, it's also possible that everyone who's in grade 1 might not necessarily be on the same outcome level. So how do we basically deal with that? In the same way, just having spent some number of years in education system does not guarantee that a person might be able to or might have attained certain skill sets. So time itself, so a lot of times our certifications and credentials, or you can say that educational degrees for that matter, might be a manifestation or a reflection of how much time a person might have spent in an educational system, but that alone is not really enough. So therefore, we need to have a better, more pragmatic understanding of this. And why is that important? Well, we'll talk about this as we move to the next slide on quality assurance. So in almost all parts of the world, graduates from higher education or tertiary education institutions directly take up positions of responsibility in decision making and influence economies for their nations. So in view of the transition that one takes from the education institutions and broader into the society, we can see the interlinkage, right? I think it's not difficult for anyone to understand that how education basically sits in the broader spectrum of institutional arrangements in the society, how it's tied with the society at large, how it's connected with the workforce, or with the labor market, how it's connected with other institutions, because because institutions are not just buildings, institutions are people, and so those people actually require certain skills and ability to basically deliver. So a lot of times we know that developing country, one of the problems that developing countries face is the problem of delivery. And it could be like problem of delivery in any sense for that matter. A delivery in terms of government institutions, a delivery in terms of private institutions at the same time, because private institutions also need people and they're kind of coming from the same pool of people in the country. Depending on what sort of education system we have and who can afford what. Uh, in case public education system is not accessible to all, then of course there is a variety of skill sets that people have, or the variety of competence, variety of the position that one may hold on the spectrum of competency. So therefore, it's very important to understand that how education and the curricular focus basically sits with all the other actors and institutions within the country, and even beyond that. Now that we know that there are so many different institutions and actors, that's where the idea of quality assurance basically comes into play. And so the quality assurance basically talks about as to whether the intended objectives in alignment with the expectations and the needs and the requirements of varied actors and institutions in the society are being met or not. So that's where I will basically talk about quality assurance, and I think this definition perfectly captures as to what quality assurance may entail. So it measures the relevance, like I talked in the previous slide, that what is basically the importance of relevance and the importance of time. So the importance of relevance is that what purpose the education is serving and for who. There must be a purpose of education to the individual. There is a purpose of education to the institutions and other varied actors that are operating in the society, and there is an education purpose to society at large. So therefore, all of these purposes define the relevance that education might have. But again, I would also like to caution that we also do not need to assume that education works in isolation. So while we are talking about curriculum development, while we're talking about education, curricular relevance for so many needs in the society, we also need to be sure that just for example, let's say that there is a lot of unemployment happening in the country. Well, education can be one of the reasons, but it may not be the only reason for that matter. So we also need to be sure that we set reasonable expectations from education, because education also sits in the broader society. And all the other institutions also affect the education delivery as well. So it's not like it's a unidirectional relationship. It's not like education alone is impacting the performance and functioning of all the other institutions. Because if that was the case, then education can also be used as a scapegoat to basically throw the blames of others' incompetencies on the malfunctioning of the education system. So it's very important to be very fair as to how much burden we want to put on education for that matter. We understand its relevance, we understand the importance of quality assurance, we understand the importance of curriculum development, we understand how it's going to feed so many different entities and actors and institutions in society. But then the direction of that relationship, in effect, is not unidirectional. So anyway, coming back to assurance, so quality assurance basically talks about relevance through response to socioeconomic needs of the present and the future. So the needs, and this is where the sustainability notion comes into play. Education, its development, its relevance, its progression, its curricular developmental approach cannot be just simply tied to what we immediately need. Of course, that is important, but then at the same time, it's also futuristic. However, um, the development and the delivery of education and ensuring its relevance is not just simply an individualistic, one individual institution's approach. Rather, there are multiple institutions that are supposed to inform this process. So, for example, the industry might have to inform as well what sort of people the government institutions need. They may inform not only their they may inform the education system not only about the expectation but also about how to ensure that those expectations are met. Same is the case from the society. We also need education to thrive, and that cannot be possible without the societal support. So, like I mentioned, we need to understand the role of different institutions and then view education curriculum development and education quality assurance from a collective approach. And that would, of course, also inform the collective approach to development at large. Now, when I talk about collective approach, that's where I think it's very important to highlight the complexity of quality assurance. Now, it's a very extended approach in the sense that we have to look at the expectations. Although I've just mentioned roles here, but expectations, of course, are there. But I think that we have always talked about educational institutions only from the expectations. I mean, we have talked about multiple institutions only from the expectations part, but we also need to understand that while expectations are set by different institutions in regards to education, there's also a role that needs to be played. And role to be played by what institutions? Well, that's what the slide basically looks at. So the roles of families, role of schools, role of high schools, role of universities, societal expectations, and of course the society's role as well, and then industries, what are their expectations, what is their role, the role of the government, and then of course environmental expectations are there as well. And then at the same time global orientation. So when we talk about quality assurance, since we talk about relevance, so we need to look at that it's a complex process, because we are kind of navigating this complexity of roles and responsibilities and expectations of so many different entities, families, schools, universities. And you can also see that since these are like three different levels of education, every level also has expectations set for the level above and for the level below it, because one level might be a feeder to another level. So the system has to, while it's speaking with the society, it also needs to speak with multiple levels as well within the education system, for that matter. So therefore, these expectations are also important to consider. Now, but the thing is, what is the purpose of all this? Well, I think governments do come up with their visions, and I think Zambia also has a vision that it's working towards. And of course, one thing which is also important to be considered, that when we talk about, let's say, when we talk about 21st century skills, that a lot of conversations, a lot of jargons, a lot of ideas are borrowed from international arena. So there is an injection of these ideas, which we also refer to as policy transfers. So there is a policy transfer from a global level, and that also sets the expectations for our education system and for anything and everything for that matter. But the thing is, it's also very important for developing countries, for that matter, or for any country, is to realize that they have to balance the international orientation with the local, national, and global expectations. So there are, because the thing is, people and countries are operating on multiple levels. Even within a country, you would know that there is, in case if it's a federalistic arrangement, you would know that there is a central government, there is a provincial government, there is a local government. So there are people on the local level, then there is a societal aspect to be considered on a national level. On a provincial or state level, and then on a national level, and then there is a global expectation. So these are different I would not say hierarchy, but multiple layers. We cannot say that one is more important than the other, because the thing is, it's I think it's something which we are beginning to realize, even on a global level, that development has to be collective. Development cannot be exclusive, because even if, for example, an exclusive development takes place, eventually countries and people will realize that we would have to go back to square one, because inequality, for that matter, in terms of, I would view inequality here that, okay, fine, you're focusing only on the national or the global level, you're not focusing on the local level. So the thing is, inequality cannot be persistent. I mean, inequality cannot last for too long, because eventually it would demand a response. It is, for example, developed countries initially focused on, and here, I mean, I'll have to be cautious here because I'm not here promoting high population rates, but developed countries, while they were developing on, while they were socioeconomically developing, they disregarded the population growth mechanism, or you can say that the population growth was, perhaps, I think, that perhaps was not viewed in a way that it we for once we basically for once we've just basically started questioning the very idea of family, for that matter, or population, for that matter, so much so that we started believing that, okay, for development to take place, of course we need to be very cognizant and understanding of how development is taking place and how population control needs to be undertaken. But then at the same time, I feel like this balance could have been done in a way that it might not have affected, or it might not have made running a family or developing a family or creating a family more problematic. Now, this is something which we can learn from developed countries, for that matter. There are countries like Japan, South Korea, that are already experiencing this. And for example, in South Korea, the birth, for example, um, an average expectation of a child from a woman in her lifetime is now less than one. So technically, I mean, according to, I'm forgetting the source, but like, based on the population, the way it's unfolding, um, the first country to become extinct from the world would be South Korea. Now, the reason why I am mentioning this, the question of population is just one example that I'm giving, and that's where my third point is coming is more relevant. That developed, um, sorry, here I think the first word is supposed to be developing. So developing countries can learn from the challenges of the developed countries, and they can better revisit or refine their own course of action. And so therefore, we don't necessarily, I mean, the developing countries need to be aware of their own context, need to be aware of their own requirements, while at the same time responding to the global orientation or multiple orientation that exists within or beyond the country context. Because no level can be compromised, because the compromise would eventually have to be addressed. It will demand a response from us. So therefore, it's important. So therefore we need to understand that the idea of curriculum development is not just about textbooks. It's not just about universities. It's not just about degrees. It's not just about skills that we are building. It's about a value orientation and understanding that it's one of the essential components in the whole array of institutions that exist, which collectively are needed in order to ensure collective development. So with that being said, I would pause my discussion here. And in case if this was a live session, I would have taken some questions, but uh, I hope you enjoy the session, and please take care of yourselves. And in case if you have any questions for that matter, what I can do is I can perhaps add my email. I can ask the organization to share my email address to anyone who needs. So thank you very much.